I'm not a big fan of the UFO intelligence prime directive hypothesis. And I do call it a hypothesis and not a theory because I don't think it warrants being called a theory. Before I get into why I'm not a fan of this hypothesis, I think it's necessary to define what the prime directive hypothesis encompasses. Taken from Wikipedia, the prime directive prohibits Starfleet personnel and spacecraft from interfering in the normal development of any society and mandates that any Starfleet vessel or crew member is expendable to prevent violation of this rule, and as the right of each sentient species to live in accordance with its normal cultural evolution is considered sacred. No Starfleet personnel may interfere with the normal and healthy development of alien life and culture. Such interference includes introducing superior knowledge, strength, or technology to a world whose society is incapable of handling such advantages wisely. Starfleet personnel may not violate this prime directive even to save their lives and or their ship unless they are acting to right an earlier violation or an accidental contamination of said culture. This directive takes precedence over any and all other consideration and carries with it the highest moral obligation. Whenever I bring up the prime directive, I feel like some people always object that I shouldn't be talking about a hypothesis or an assessment that stems from a television series. And my response to that is, I don't care if it stems from a television series. Some people have adopted it and believe that it reflects the agenda of UFO intelligence. And that's why I am catering to this. And so I'm not only not a fan of the prime directive, but I find it somewhat annoying, to be perfectly honest. And I think the prime reason that I find it a bit annoying is because I feel like there are a lot of people who believe the prime directive is 100% factual, when at best, it's just an opinion based on limited data. Personally, I don't think we are justified to believe any hypothesis is 100% true. If you want to believe something's 100% true, that's your business. But if we are to just look at this from a rational standpoint, I don't see a good argument for ever being 100% convinced of any hypothesis when so little data that's definitive is available on UFOs. And the data that we do have often contradicts one another, simply because experiencers have different experiences, different interpretations. Furthermore, how are we to know that an experiencer is interpreting their experience accurately? In other words, they may say, this is what happened to me, this is what was said to me, fine. But how do we know that the connection between the phenomenon and the person experiencing it is such that what they interpret is a clear reflection of the phenomenon itself? I don't know how we would establish that. We could say it's likely, but I don't know how we would establish that definitively. Now let's dive into why I find the prime directive problematic as it is applied to UFO intelligence. As you have just seen, when I gave you a citation of what the prime directive encompasses, it goes so far that it lays out that the crew and the equipment is expendable if it is going to threaten the natural development of a civilization. Now, when I say that, hopefully the first thing you think of is recovered UAP. Now, I can't prove that any nation has recovered UAP, but if that part of ufological lore has any truth to it, already we see a clear violation of the prime directive. Because if the United States government indeed recovered a machine that's thousands of years ahead of human technology in the 40s near Roswell, New Mexico, how can it be said that that will not interfere with the normal development of human civilization? And since it's obvious that it will and that it does, why didn't the alien intelligence simply recover the craft themselves so that the US government could get their grimy hands on it or destroyed it pulverized it. They didn't do that, now did they? So, right off the bat, the prime directive cannot be applied to UFO intelligence if we assume that there have been crashes and they have been recovered. And some believe that Russia has also recovered craft. Some believe that there's actually a race to understand UFO technology so that it can be weaponized, so that nation states can have an advantage over their adversaries. Does that not sound to you like a influence over the development of human civilization? To me, it does. So whatever alien intelligence encompasses, right off the bat, they failed in fulfilling the prime directive as it is understood from the Star Trek television series. And really, doesn't this all boil down to manipulation, whether intentional or not? You can manipulate someone even if that's not your intention. I would argue that the UFO presence manipulates humanity and interferes with our development for sure. For one thing, the way that UFO intelligence presents itself seems like it has a fine-tuning in its exposure to our civilization. That fine-tuning basically encompasses of presenting itself enough so that a huge portion of civilization believes something is going on, but not enough so that our world institutions give credence to that perspective. And part of that may be the absurdity of UFO intelligence itself. UFO intelligence does itself no favors in trying to persuade our institutions that it is here. Whether it's stories of people being taken against their will and being examined in a medical way, shall we say, or stories of receiving telepathy, or stories of crashes and covering that up. If that indeed happened and it was successful, I can see how people within institutions would just knee-jerk react and say, that's not possible. Governments can't keep secrets like that. I would know. If something of that nature happened, I would know. Potentially mutilating animals such as cows. A lot of high strangeness. Landing at schoolyards and telepathically communicating with children. Are we to believe that this intelligence could not have operated in a different way that would have appealed to the biases of our institutions, so that all these decades would not transpire without them looking into UFO intelligence itself? And what has been the fallout of this fine-tuning? Well, let me name a few. Experiencers not being believed, being ridiculed. Imagine that. Imagine being taken against your will, having very traumatic experiences, and nobody believes you, not the least of which is our institutions. Is that good for the psychological development of a human being? Is that alone not interference by the phenomenon itself, to where the development of humanity would not fall under the umbrella of normalcy? I mean, I can just go on and on and on. People have lost their jobs over this. Lonnie Zamora, he stepped down from being a sheriff because he didn't want to embarrass his town based upon the sighting that he had. Pilots that have been fired from their positions because they reported a UAP. Them getting fired from their jobs, is that not interference of normal development of human civilization? Is that not a detriment to those that have gotten fired? Tell me, is that not? And keep going. I can go on all day long and talk about how the phenomenon has interfered with humanity's development. This may be somewhat trivial, but all the debates we always constantly have between skeptic and believer. We go in circles. And furthermore, What is going to happen when we have disclosure? What? Do you know what's going to happen? Do I have to spell it out for you? Oh, I will. I will do that. There's going to be a tremendous diminishment in trust in governments as a result of how the phenomenon interacts with our species, with this fine-tuning of allowing itself for civilization to suspect it's there. All the while, governments could say, no, it's not. There's nothing here. There's nothing to see here, everybody. It's swamp gas, dummy. It's balloons. Stop talking about UFOs. There's nothing to this. And then when that day comes to an end, because the evidence is presented in such a way in which our institutions can't deny it, oh no, now our governments have to come clean. And is that going to make them look stupid? Making our governments look stupid is an interference with normal development of human civilization, is it not? Oh, it is tenfold. Absolutely. No. Now, this phenomenon has never followed the Prime Directive from day one. Ever. And that's why the notion that it did or does, I find so ridiculous. But then again, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm the misguided one. I don't think so, though. So ultimately, the big difference between the Prime Directive as it is portrayed in Star Trek and what UFO intelligence has done is that the Prime Directive is hands-off. Let's not interfere with human development. But UFO intelligence has a very robust manipulation component to it that the Prime Directive doesn't seem to really incorporate into its theory. That's the difference. That's the difference no one wants to talk about. The Prime Directive, for example, says you can't give technology to humanity unless they can deal with it wisely. Are we to trust the United States and Russia to deal with UFO technology wisely? I don't think so. It may turn out good in the end, but this idea that we are trustworthy enough to deal with it wisely seems potentially far-fetched. Now, it is true that this seeming orchestration by the phenomenon itself may end up working out in the favor of humanity by a long margin. Oh, I don't discount that possibility. In fact, I've created a whole hypothesis on that possibility called Alien AI Hypothesis, formerly known as Alien Supercomputer Hypothesis. I've done a series of videos on my hypothesis, and I will give a link in the description where I give you all those videos in a playlist. But I want to caution you that my hypothesis is very likely not true simply because it is not based on a definitive data. It's based on what I see and just my fun explorative guess. So it's not to be taken very seriously, but it was fun, and I don't regret those videos at all. I think they're kind of fun. So if the phenomenon itself is engaging humanity in a way to influence our civilization to the point where after disclosure, humanity loses a tremendous amount of trust in their own governments, which I think is an inevitability, that to me does not fall under the Prime Directive statute as portrayed in the Star Trek television series, simply because disclosure is going to lead to such fundamental changes in our civilization. That's natural? That's normal? No, that's orchestration. The result of orchestration. That's not normal. That's manipulation. Now, you can argue that manipulation is for our own good, and maybe it is. But that's besides the point. The point is that what UFO intelligence has been doing for decades and how it has influenced us or even interfered with our development is well beyond the provisions of the Prime Directive as it is portrayed in the Star Trek TV series. So that's why I don't like when people use the term Prime Directive, because to me, it appears self-evident that UFO intelligence has not abided by the Prime Directive by any stretch of the imagination, because the interference has been so intrinsic. It has been so powerful and robust toward our civilized people losing jobs, people being ridiculed, countries getting technology that they can use militarily and not knowing what the outcome of that will be. It maybe not be a good outcome. And even if it is a good outcome, it still doesn't matter. It's still a violation of the Prime Directive as it's portrayed in the Star Trek series. Yeah, I definitely lean strongly toward a manipulation happening. So while there might be some truth to the phenomenon wants us to discover it ourselves, and maybe in some way it is waiting for us to acknowledge it more before it presents itself in a more unambiguous way collectively, that still doesn't contradict what I'm saying, in that it has clearly violated the tenets as it's laid out in the Star Trek TV series of the Prime Directive. Furthermore, I would argue that it's not really waiting for us to wake up. No, it's manipulating us to wake up. Those are two very different things. And in the process of waking us up, there's all kinds of collateral damage that I've already gone over. Collateral damage equaling interference. So those are my problems with the Prime Directive. Maybe I'm wrong, but that's just the way that I see it. And that's why I don't think the Prime Directive is a good model for how UFO intelligence engages humanity. Thank you so much for watching. I appreciate it. If you'd like to support this channel, first and foremost, subscribe. Beyond that, I have a merch shop. Where I sell t-shirts. I have a Patreon. I have a YouTube membership. You could give me a one-time donation if you wish so are inclined, and so forth. All of that is in the description below. And in addition, the series on my alien AI hypothesis is also in the description below. I've kind of shied away from these philosophical videos because I'm trying to be more news oriented, but once in a while it's like a seasoning maybe. You know what I mean? Too much salt's not good. The right amount of salt is perfect. I'll see you in the next episode. All that have supported me on Patreon, YouTube membership, buying merch, one-time donations, thank you so much. I really couldn't do it without you. See you in the next episode.